Hello and welcome to another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal. I'm Jamie Johnson, the legal and government correspondent, and it being spring election season, we have another guest who is running for office, and this is the office of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and our guest is Dr. Lowell Holtz. Dr. Holtz, welcome to the show.
Hi, Jamie. Thanks for letting me be here.
Absolutely. Well, and thanks for coming up to Hudson. We missed Dr. Evers when he was in town. We had to do his by Skype, so having in person makes it a little bit easier. So we're going to follow a similar format as his and start with obviously your background and your experience, because you're not kind of from this area of the state. Is that correct?
Right. It was a nice 4-hour drive this morning to get here for the interview and the taping segment, and actually it was a beautiful drive. I don't mind coming up here. My son goes to UW-Madison, and his girlfriend lives up here, so he makes a jaunt on a regular basis as well. So
okay,
it's
where is there? Where did you originate your drive then this morning?
well, this morning I came from the Palmyra Eagle area.
Okay.
But I grew up in the city of Milwaukee. I spent a lot of my childhood in that Sherman Park neighborhood that had the riots about 7 months ago.
Okay.
And when I was growing up, my dad was a Milwaukee police officer, and I remember watching the riots in '67, sitting on my parents' bed with my 4 siblings, seeing if we could see Dad on TV because he was a patrol sergeant at that time. And then later on, he retired and went back to the city as an inner city pastor. So I had some great role models growing up. And on my mom's side, she grew up in a big farming family. And so we'd alternate our weekends between being in the city or being out helping Grandpa on the farm.
Okay. Well, so that's where you grew up, was in the Milwaukee area, and this farm was, I take it, in southeast Wisconsin?
Yeah, around Johnson Creek.
Okay.
In that neighborhood.
Sure. And so where'd you go to school?
I went to high school at Martin Luther High School, and I met my wife at the junior prom when we were 16, and so we've been hanging out for the last 42 years.
Okay.
And enjoyed it a lot. And then I went from Martin Luther High School. As I said, my dad was a Lutheran school pastor, or Lutheran church pastor. And so I went to Concordia College when it was on 33rd and State in Milwaukee, a 2-year college. Got my associate's degree there, then went to Concordia in Illinois, River Forest, and got my bachelor's degree in education, and was called to teach in rural Minnesota at a Lutheran school there, 3rd and 4th grade. Enjoyed that a lot. That was, if anybody ever wants a second career, teaching 3rd and 4th grade is lots of fun.
Yeah. It's a good age.
It's a great age because they still get excited about learning, and they like to compete with each other to make the teacher happy, and can't ask for better than that. The only thing that came closer was my wife and I decided after about 3 years of teaching that I wanted to try my hand as a public school principal. We had our second daughter on the way, so I couldn't just quit, but we moved to Whitewater, where I served as a full-time police officer for 5 years while I was getting my master's degree through UW-Madison. And that was a lot of, actually being a police officer when the drinking age was 18 in a college town actually was kind of fun.
Yeah.
So when I received my ed admin degree after going to UW-Madison.
Administration and
education.
Administration,
yeah. I was offered my first principal's job in Cambridge. Was in Cambridge for, quite a few years. And we became the only school in Dane County that had 100% of our kids proficient and advanced on our 3rd grade reading test. And there was a school district in northeastern Wisconsin. So I've traveled all over the state of Wisconsin, called Peshtigo. And
where they had the Great Fire in
yes,
1876.
A great history, and they do a great job of sharing it. And I interviewed with their board, and they gave me the parameters. They said they wanted to increase test scores. That's why they were interviewing reading scores. And they wanted to reduce special ed referrals. And I could do anything I wanted with the teachers, but I couldn't increase the budget. I thought that was a great challenge. So I got together with the teachers, we brought in the parents, talked about what was, the best research out there that we could implement without, doing anything over the budget. and came up with the Tennessee Star research back then, which is reducing class sizes. And so we were able to reduce class sizes without adding staff by repurposing some staff. And it became so successful that the teachers and the parents nominated me for the Wisconsin Principal of the Year Award, which I received then. And then shortly thereafter, we did a lot of presentations on how you could do this in other school districts. I received the National Distinguished Principal Award as well. And again, it wasn't because I'm a genius when it comes to being a principal. It's because I recognized the talent that was in the room with me when we were trying to plan what was best for our kids. And I realized that the person that makes the biggest difference in a kid's life isn't the administrator, it's not the superintendent, it's the teacher that's in front of those kids every single day. And if you set up an environment where the teacher is excited to be there and happy to be there and has the ability to set discipline in the classroom, teachers rock the world. And that's how you increase academic achievement. While I was there, my wife and I were still going to school to get our doctoral degree at Cardinal Stritch University in the Milwaukee area, and received that and decided to try my hand at a school district to see if the things we had focused on local control a lot and involving and collaborating with people and going from the bottom up rather than top down as far as management goes. So we decided we'd try that at the district level. And Palmyra Eagle was a great place to start. It's a very friendly community. It's very much a farming community as well. And so my back 40 neighbor was the president of the Corn Growers Association. Because of the focus on that, we had some of the best FFA programs in the state, I believe. We had the tractor day where the kids could bring the tractor and things like that. And we did very well competitively as far as academics go. In a short time after I was there, the Beloit School District opened up. And as I said at the beginning, I grew up in the...
By opened up, meaning they had a superintendent position that was
open,
All
yeah.
right.
And it was open because they were on their 5th year as a failing school district. And back then, after year 5, the state had the power to take over the school district if they so chose to do so. And be very involved in it, in the decision making. So the board didn't want that to happen. They interviewed people, and I was lucky enough to be hired there. And that was there's 20 large urban districts in Wisconsin, and Beloit is one of them. And they actually had scores that were lower than Milwaukee's and Madison for their minority population, the African American and Hispanic kids. And when I looked at the high school, there were 2,400 kids in the high school, which is one of the biggest high schools in Wisconsin. And we had 2 active Latin American gangs and 2 active African American gangs. And the halls were not exactly safe, because as I started talking to teachers, parents, they'd have a dozen, 15 fights every single day because kids would...
So what did you do to address that?
Remember back when we were at school and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and you have to start with safety? Well, you're not going to learn anything if you're worried about getting in fights all the time. So we started with focusing on safety and taking back control of the hallways. Now, every community is different, and every community is going to have a different way of doing it. What I did is I started because I knew early that I was going to be the superintendent. So April, May, somewhere in there. And so I started talking with the faith leaders, the business leaders, and said, what's going on? Why are you accepting a failing school? What can we do to make it better? Started talking to the teachers, and basically we started getting the whole community involved in trying to find a solution. One of the things we did that I could do as the administrator, as far as the safety in the hallways go, was I had been a police officer in protective services, and I knew in protective services you can retire much earlier than other professions can. So at the age of 50, many of the Beloit police officers could retire, and many of them did, with full benefits. So I could hire them for about $20 an hour, which is a steal for that kind of person that really knows the system, knows the kids know them, and the kids literally recognized the men and women that I had in the hallways for security on the first day of school. So from day one, we had back control of the hallways. And
so how many did you bring in? I mean, it was a matter of more security or just better trained?
Better trained. There's 3 floors, in that school, and so I'd have a couple per floor. And that way, it tied into also what I could do in the classrooms, because the next step is helping the teachers out in the classroom. So I told the teachers said, well, they were having problems getting their lessons taught because the kids were being disrespectful, the kids were fighting, they were having to confront them all the time, and then they weren't getting backed up by the office. And I said, I'll tell you what, I will guarantee that we'll have an administrator walk through your room once every period of the day. So if a kid has their head on the desk and you don't want to confront them, you don't have to. You can do what you do best, which is teach. The administrator will come through, confront the child, and talk to them. And if the kid is cooperative, put them back in the class. And if the kid's not cooperative, take them with them. And if a fight breaks out in the room, that's when they could stick their head out in the hall and get the security to come take care of it. It didn't take long before the teachers had control of those classrooms. I mean, it was almost immediately. And all I asked of them was that they do bell-to-bell teaching. I had hired a great high school principal from Ohio, and he was so totally on board. He would think of things before it even came into my head. And so we really were able to change the climate and the culture internally then, because we would start talking to the kids every time we would see them, ask them how they did on the ACT. Did they take the ACT test yet? No, they didn't. It's time to sign up for it. They couldn't afford it. Well, that's where the business partnerships came in. We would have businesses that would adopt a class, a grade level, and if we needed the $43 or whatever it was for the ACT, they would cover it for the student. The other thing we did was reach out to the parents. One of the reasons Beloit was on the failing school list was because they only had 60% of their kids taking the state test, because they didn't see any purpose in it. So I had, along my high school.
What year are we talking that this was?
In Beloit, probably 2006, 7, somewhere in there.
Okay, so you were in Beloit in 2006 now, and you had mentioned about being a principal, so you've got some private school experience, public school experience, administratively. You've had multiple superintendent positions, and I just wanted to get those out here
absolutely.
for our voters.
And I had one final one, which was suburban Milwaukee.
Okay.
The Beloit was very enjoyable. We still have a house in Beloit. Suburban Milwaukee was interesting. It was a lot more. It was very competitive.
What suburban Milwaukee? Which district was it?
The Whitnell School District.
Whitnell.
Whitnell has about 40% of the city of Greenfield, 100% of Hills Corners, and a piece of Franklin. And that was a very high-performing school district, and they wanted to be even higher performing, which was an interesting challenge. And we did. They had their highest ACT scores in school history while I was there. But again, it's not because of things I did. My dad would say if I was the smartest person in the room, I was in the wrong room. You just surround yourself with smart people who have the same kind of passion and drive that you do to see kids succeed. And that's what I always look for. That's one of the reasons why I'm running, because I feel that when I see that Wisconsin is the worst state in the nation when it comes to graduation gaps and achievement gaps, I find it totally appalling. There's absolutely no reason for that.
Wisconsin's the worst in achievement gap between
in every state of the union.
Between races, is that what we're talking about?
Yep.
Okay.
We literally lose 7,000 kids across the entire state to dropouts, which the studies have shown that it's about $503 million we spend every year on dropouts alone. So for the past 8 years, that's over $4 billion. And can you imagine what more we could be doing in our schools with that kind of influx of money? We need to do a better job. We're way over-regulated, and we need to do less top-down and become more of a supportive agency from DPI, which is one of the reasons I'm running. I can't stand the thought of forcing a 4-year-old, a parent of a 4-year-old, to take that child to a school, let's use Milwaukee as the example, where they know that 10 years later, when they graduate in 8th grade and are ready for high school, that there are schools that have 0% of their students proficient in reading, or 0% of their students proficient in math. And the poverty is a huge issue. We have parents that will not let their kids sit in the front rooms of the house because they're literally bullets that rip through the house. In Milwaukee, just a few short months ago, there was a story of a grandparent holding their child in the living room, and while they were holding the child was killed in their arms. And no grandparent should ever have to put up with that. There's only two ways out of poverty. Education is one, crime is the other. And like Sheriff Clark said after those riots in the Sherman Park neighborhood about 7 months ago, it wasn't the officer-involved shooting that caused the riots. That was just the spark, the ignition point. He said it's the years of neglect on the educational system for the kids in those high minority, high poverty areas. We were talking about Beloit before. The Beloit African-American graduation rate when I started was lower than Milwaukee and Madison. I've been out of Beloit now for 7 years. And the test scores in Beloit for our African-American population are pushing, they were the high 80s. And the Latino group was in the high 90s. In Milwaukee, the African-American graduation rate is 56%. In Madison, it's 54%. Does that mean the black kids in Beloit are smarter than the black kids in Milwaukee or Madison? Absolutely not. It's because they put a system in place in Beloit where the kids feel supported and the kids feel challenged. Kids will sink to the level of our expectations, but they'll also rise to the level of our expectations. And so we need to give those failing schools the opportunity to receive the help they need to be successful. And what we can't continue doing is doing things that happened in this past year where we had 55 schools identified in Milwaukee alone. There's like 70 some across the entire state or 80, but 55 in Milwaukee. And I went to bed on a Sunday night and there were 55. 2 nights later, there were 0 failing schools in Milwaukee because the state superintendent took the bar, which was low to begin with, and dropped it to the floor and said there are no failing schools in Milwaukee. Because the legislature had passed the Opportunity Schools legislation, so the lowest 5 could get help. And he said that's not necessary. When I was growing up, the leadership that I had from my parents said, when I mess up, I need to name what the problem is. So failing schools, I need to own it. I can't blame someone else. You know, think of it with your kids, you know, they always want to blame somebody. Well, there is no one to blame, and you need to fix it. So we need someone who's going to name the problem, own the problem, and fix the problem, because we can't keep failing tens of thousands of kids. And when I come up to Hudson, when I go to Green Bay, and I talk about your taxpayer dollars, all of our taxpayer dollars are funneling into those high poverty, large urban districts and paying for those failing schools. We're paying for it, whether I'm in Palmyra, Eagle, or whether I'm living in Beloit. And so it's a waste of money and it's a waste of kids' lives.
Well, would you change that by maybe changing the funding mechanisms?
No. The funding mechanisms will evolve over time.
Because you mentioned about our tax dollars. I mean, our property tax dollars stay here and fund our Hudson schools. It's the state income tax dollars and the state aid through other taxes.
Right, the state funding formula says what
that's where the shifting goes around.
Yeah,
right.
in the state funding formula.
Sure. So that's what I mean. Are you in favor of changing that, changing how the funds get shifted around?
I think you need adequate and equitable funding. But I don't think, whether we're sitting here in Hudson, sitting in Madison, or sitting in Beloit or Milwaukee, that we can tell what La Crosse needs. To find out what's adequate for La Crosse, just like the Teach Initiative, you need to go to La Crosse and say, where are we falling short, what's working, what's not working, and you do that collaborative local control issue where you say, okay, now and then you take that and that's a piece of the puzzle. It's like doing a 1,000-piece puzzle, which my wife gets into, I don't. But you start putting those pieces of the puzzle together and then you can make the changes. Governor Walker, for example, Governor Walker recognized the transportation budget for our urban areas, our rural areas, was in drastic need of help. And he targeted money for that issue, because when you're driving.
When was that?
This in his budget proposal now, that's going to be
moving forward.
Okay, right, in front of Joint Finance now. When you travel, you see the distances that kids are going to be spending in those school buses. And besides the time issue, you also have the extra cost and the money that they would typically spend for things in their classroom, they're now spending on transportation. And so you need to do some balancing and things like that. And
Sure.
so there are targeted ways, but if we have been all across the state of Wisconsin, this is not just large urban areas, it's not just black kids, Hispanic kids. The National Assessment of Educational Progress, NAEP, did a test every state in the nation. We have less than 40% of our kids at 4th grade and less than 40% of our kids at 8th grade across the entire state that are proficient or advanced in reading and math. That is not a success story. That's something we need to improve. Sticking with Common Core is not going to improve that. Common Core is something that hinders local school districts like Hudson from doing the type of curriculum that they want to do, because it's forcing us, because of the school district report card. The school district report card grades, a big chunk of it is how well you perform on the state test. The state test was just contracted to align with Common Core, and it has been for the past several years. So if Common Core is the test, you want your kids to do well on the test, obviously, you have to align your curriculum to the test. And if you don't do that, your kids are not going to do well. So every school district superintendent in Wisconsin is trying to make their school look successful in a competitive marketplace with open enrollment, school choice, vouchers.
But isn't that true regardless of what name you put to the state standards? That's always going to be the case, that you're going to teach to the standards. You set the bar low, then then you can meet your standard easier. But
what happens when you do a federal program like Common Core, then the people in Washington, D.C. are actually setting the curriculum standards for you. The way the Wisconsin Constitution is set up, the Department of Public Instruction sets model academic standards. Those are, like you need to be able to read by the time you're in 3rd grade.
Sure.
They're supposed to be big picture standards. And then to meet those big picture standards, every school district is allowed to pick their own standards and curriculum to meet that. So when I was in Peshtigo, our school board said, the Connecticut standards are highly acclaimed. They match all the big picture ones we have in Wisconsin. Let's model ours after theirs. And every school board had the opportunity and privilege to do that. And then they could say, is this being successful? It's not being successful. How do you modify it? How do you adapt it? And how do you move on? So, no, and Common Core is it's a limited set of criteria, and it goes from A to Z. And there is no job in the world that you can capture with a limited set of criteria. When you and I were kids, we had norm reference testing, which you could compare from state to state to state. So you could compare from Wisconsin across the river to Minnesota.
All right. I'm getting the high sign that we kind of jumped around a little bit. I think we did talk about the local control and what we do for failing districts. You mentioned that. How do you see your position in whether, it's a constitutional position, Department of Public Instruction? Are you an advocate for public education or just education in general?
Both. It's not an either or for me.
Okay.
When we were in Peshtigo, we had a joint council on education, which included the parochial schools and the public schools. And that was before choice and vouchers, because most of those were K-8 schools, which meant that most of those kids were going to come into our high school. We wanted those kids to be successful. So we let them know, what are we working on? What, this is what we're doing. What are you guys doing that's successful?
That's part competition too.
Exactly.
The private school is going to try and keep up.
Never be afraid of competition.
But are you comfortable with public tax dollars supporting private schools?
The public tax dollars don't support the private schools. The public tax dollars go with the student, otherwise it would be unconstitutional. So those parents pay taxes, just like ours do. I'm very strong for community public schools. I spent my entire career trying to make them the best that they could be. But I am not also afraid to reach out, and if there's a struggling school in my district that would like help, giving them the help that they need, as long as it doesn't take away from what we're doing with our kids in the public school. And
that's the key point, right? As long as it's not taken out. So if you're growing the pie for both of them, I guess if you shift some tax dollars and to use as resources for private schools. But what about as far as the playing field and the rules? I mean, there's a reason why private schools teach at a much smaller cost per student, and they don't have the restrictions, the regulations, and the special ed requirements that the public schools have.
Actually, now with the law, they don't get to pick and choose. If you're special ed, you still get to go to the school, and there's an amount of money that goes with them to meet their special education needs. They don't get to pick and choose. It's the most, it's a lottery system. If there's more kids than they have spots. The public schools have done a great job of meeting the needs, and Title I funding has also helped in some of those, because that's for all kids irregardless. The funding issue, if we can do something to stop the kids from dropping out and capture even half of that $4 billion and bring it back in, we shouldn't have funding challenges as they
Right.
increase the opportunities, because I think parents have to be the ones that have the final say in where their kids go to school.
Okay, so we've now final as far as the post-Act 10 assessment, because you were a superintendent when Act 10 went through, correct?
Yes.
And you saw what that did, because you mentioned earlier about it's important to keep the teachers happy. That's how they, when they want to teach and so forth. So how did we do in that respect on the post-Act 10? Is that, do you see us better off, worse off, as far as teacher morale and getting teachers excited about teaching? Are more people getting into the profession and staying in the profession? Well, are they? I don't know.
No, they are. There's teachers leaving the profession because they're frustrated. So as a state superintendent group, we surveyed teachers, for our regional meetings and said, what is frustrating you? What's driving you out? We all thought it was going to be Act 10 and the demise of the unions and the power of them. It wasn't. It's something called educator effectiveness and TeachScape. It's the bureaucratic additional requirements that are pulling them and stealing time from them. It's frustrating teachers like crazy. Before Act 10, I had to lay teachers off every single year as a superintendent, wherever I was. After Act 10, I haven't had to lay off a single teacher. So from my perspective, it's been helpful in keeping class sizes at a reasonable level. The teachers, however, are extremely frustrated, and I've talked to thousands of teachers all across Wisconsin. And Milwaukee ones, for example, the last group I met were middle school teachers, and they have to be they have to be extremely dedicated to be in Milwaukee, a middle school teacher, and they don't get the support in their classrooms that they should for discipline. But they said they spend over an hour each and every day inputting data because of educator effectiveness and the requirements of Common Core with the checklists. The largest teachers unions in the United States are opposed to Common Core, like the Chicago Teachers Union, because it takes the teaching time away from teachers and puts them more as trainers and data type of people. And that's the time that teachers used to spend going over what happened during the day with the real-time assessments, saying this is what worked for this group of kids, this didn't work well over here, what are we going to do to adapt and modify so that these kids are up at the same level that these kids are. And that time has been taken away from them, and the frustration level is through the roof. And so we need to make it a rewarding profession again. That's part of the TEACH initiative that I announced yesterday in Madison.
And we'll leave with that. It's you announced kind of a teacher's bill of rights, emphasizing safety, eliminating the strangling bureaucracy, which you just alluded to, local control, which you spend a lot of this time talking about, and then giving the teachers a voice. And we tried to do that here at our local level, always involve the teachers in any kind of, especially our compensation system, and it goes over much easier when it's from the bottom up rather than top down. So,
absolutely.
Dr. Holtz, thank you very much for joining us here live on the show, and we got election coming up here in a couple weeks, so April 4th, is that correct?
April 4th, and if people want to know more about my platform, they go to kidservative.org. So it's not conservative. It focuses on kids, so you take the con off and you put kid down, and it's kidservative.org.
So K-I-D, S-E-R-T-A.
No, S-E-R-V-A.
V-A-T-I-V-E. All right.
.org.
Kidservative, got it. All right. .org.
.org.
Not .com. All right, very good. Well,
thanks, Jamie.
Thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching another segment of Western Wisconsin Journal.